Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cathal and as Chair of the RDS Foundation Board, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's joint RDS and NUI Galway Farm Level Renewable Energy webinar. As a country and as a sector, we've been set significant challenges in relation to climate neutrality. Teagasc, their macro analysis, found that energy mitigation through renewable energy and energy efficiency had the potential to account for 17% of emission reductions, which is a very significant amount. The objective of this webinar is to elicit the views of stakeholders and to initiate a conversation on how to reach those targets and to act as a catalyst for action in relation to renewable energy, carbon technologies and incentives. The webinar will include two sessions. The first on farm level renewable energy technologies, what to do, and the second on making it happen, how to do. Both sessions will be followed by a discussion with a panel of experts. And this webinar is organised as part of the continuing RDS Climate Smart Agriculture series, where we address the factors influencing the sustainable economic, environmental and social development of agriculture in Ireland. It draws upon research undertaken by NUI Galway, funded by the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. And we're delighted to welcome Damien O'Reilly to host today's discussion. Damien is joined by a great lineup of guest speakers and expert panelists for this afternoon, and look forward to the presentations and to the discussion. On behalf of the Society, I want to thank all involved in today's webinar for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us here today to share their insights and expertise. And I'd especially like to thank our partner on today's workshop, NUI Galway and SAI, and to thank them for their help and support in organising this important and timely discussion. I would like to express my explicit appreciation to Paul Farrelly, Geoghegan and Barry Caslin for the work they've done in organising today's event. And I would like to hand over to our host for this afternoon, Damien O'Reilly.
Cathal, thank you very much indeed, and you are welcome along here to this webinar organised by the RDS in association with NUI Galway. Now, we're actually here live in the RDS and we're joined virtually by some of our guests and presenters, but today we are going to focus on the area of renewable energy and how on-farm renewable energy can meet with the climate change challenge. As I said, we will be spending the next hour and 30 minutes or so talking about these issues with our guests as outlined by Cathal. And indeed, if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat and we will try to get to them a little bit later on. But our first presentation is from Dr. Geoghegan of NUI Galway. Dr. Geoghegan is a postdoctoral researcher at NUI Galway working on the BioCircle project funded by the SEAI and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. Cathal, it's over to you.
Thank you, Damien. My name is Dr. Cathal Geoghegan and I am a postdoctoral researcher working on the BioCircle project in NUI Galway with funding from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. This presentation gives an oversight of the economics of renewable energy in Irish agriculture. We start with looking at the Teagasc marginal abatement cost curve for bioenergy in agriculture, which shows the potential for bioenergy to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions up to the year 2030. The MAC curve shows a mean annual mitigation potential of 1.47 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year, which from 2021 to 2030 is possible, but only if a wide range of mitigation measures are adopted. Large cost savings are achievable with increases in farm energy efficiency, while large mitigation potential is attainable through the use of wood biomass and energy crops for heat and power. Overall, there is currently a critical need for Ireland to increase its use of renewable energy. Ireland has failed to reach its 2020 renewable targets for heat and transport, and will greatly need to increase the renewable energy capacity in the coming years. However, the government's target of net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050 provides an immense opportunity to replace fossil fuel technologies with those derived from the bioeconomy, where Ireland is rich in resources. Examples of such resources include forestry, energy crops, agricultural wastes, agri-food and municipal wastes, as well as the ability to use land to house renewable energy generating technologies such as solar and wind. Forestry can provide woody biomass for the generation of heat and power. Woody biomass can be processed into chips or pellets for use in boilers or used as firewood in domestic fireplaces. Many forests planted in the 1990s and 2000s under the afforestation scheme are currently at the thinning stage, providing a source for wood energy. However, difficulties related to the licensing system are currently restricting the level of wood mobilization in the country. Anaerobic digestion involves the breakdown of organic matter in order to produce biogas and biomethane, which is nearly identical to natural gas. Agricultural feedstocks that can be used in the anaerobic digestion process include grass silage, energy crops such as oilseed rape or straw, and slurry from pigs or cattle. AD systems can be built at farm scale or on larger scale plants to produce biomethane to be injected into the national grid. AD is an established technology on the continent, but barriers to its use in Ireland exist, including the sourcing and transport of feedstocks and obtaining funding to establish the necessary infrastructure. Energy crops such as short rotation coppice willow and miscanthus can produce biomass for use in boilers and combined heat and power units and have previously been combusted for electricity generation. Both crops are suitable for Irish conditions and have previously been grown here under incentives from the 2007 bioenergy scheme. However, the lack of a market for crops at that time led to an ending of the scheme in the mid-2010s. Solar photovoltaic is a small but growing industry in Ireland. Up to now, it has mostly involved the installation of solar PV panels on roofs and farm buildings to provide domestic electricity, but there is now increased interest in installing ground-mounted solar PV arrays around the country. The Renewable Energy Support Scheme, which held its first auction in 2020, has kick-started solar development with 63 solar projects successful in the first RES auction. As a result, there is increased demand for farmland from solar companies on which to place solar PV arrays. At the farm level, increasing energy efficiency can also represent a win-win for farmers by both reducing energy costs and limiting greenhouse gas emissions. Monitoring energy usage on the farm allows you to identify where energy is used and take action to reduce where possible. Investing in new technologies such as heat pumps for heating, LED lighting, and a plate cooler to cool milk for dairy farmers can reduce costs in the long term. However, these technologies require upfront costs which many farmers may not be able to afford. For heating, the support scheme for renewable heat is available to assist farmers to install heat pumps or renewable energy boilers and combined heat and power systems. It may be possible for farmers to sell renewable energy back to the national grid from next year, while carbon trading by farmers may be possible in the near future. Currently, a large percentage of land in Ireland is used for agricultural purposes, with nearly 70% of all land either used for grass to provide forage or cropland. Nearly 11% of land is used for forestry. Of the grassland, the vast majority is used for cattle farming, with smaller amounts being used for dairy and sheep. Some change in how land is used in Ireland are inevitable if climate change targets are to be achieved. Increased levels of forest planting are necessary to avert the possibility of forestry becoming a net carbon emitter rather than a source of net carbon sequestration in the coming years. Further auctions under the RES scheme will increase the amount of land used for wind and solar. However, some changes in land use may be a win-win in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing farm incomes. Current research from our own BioCircle project looks at one segment of the renewable value chain, which is the farmer's land use decision. The aim of this piece of research is to compare the marginal economic returns derived from agriculture and renewable energy production on a per hectare basis. We compare the average income from the main agricultural systems, which are dairy, cattle rearing, cattle finishing, sheep, and tillage, with three forms of renewable energy production: grass silage, SRC willow, and solar PV. These economic returns have two components: the private return, which is the market value the farmer receives for what they produce, and the social return, which adds the future value of greenhouse gases to the private return. This social value is measured in terms of a carbon value, which gives a monetary return to the farmer for each tonne of carbon emissions averted. The future value of greenhouse gases is measured as one of three carbon values per tonne: €32 per tonne, €100 per tonne, or €163 per tonne. The results shown here are for the 3 different sources of renewable energy. If grass silage was grown for anaerobic digestion, the private return would be smaller than the average amount for all major farming systems. At the €100 carbon value, grass silage production would be more profitable than cattle and sheep farming on average. If short rotation coppice willow was to be grown to be used as biomass, it would also require €100 carbon value to be more profitable than cattle and sheep farming on average. In the solar energy scenario, it is assumed that a solar company leases land from the farmer at the price of €1,000 per acre. At this price, the private return to the farmer, even before the carbon value is added, is higher than the average per hectare earnings of any farming system, even dairy. These results showed that with adequate supports, emissions from agriculture can be reduced, farmer incomes can be protected, and higher levels of renewable energy production can be achieved. However, previous experience with bioenergy support schemes demonstrates that this is not an easy process. Martin Mulcairns, who is also working on the BioCircle project with us, has studied the bioenergy scheme instituted in 2007 that incentivized growth of SRC willow and miscanthus as energy crops. Under the scheme, circa 1,000 hectares of willow and 3,000 hectares of miscanthus was planted. Despite buy-in from planters, a market for biomass from these crops failed to develop, with demand for miscanthus especially being limited by an inability to be co-fired with peat at large scale in electricity plant boilers. As a result, a large share of the planted crops has since been removed, and a skepticism towards the planting of such crop has developed amongst farmers. The disappointment of the bioenergy scheme highlights the need to take a systems perspective when considering how best to develop new renewable energy sectors in Ireland. One such perspective that may be useful in this context is the concept of the innovation system. This is a network of organizations, enterprises, and individuals focused on bringing new products, new processes, and new forms of organization into social and economic use, together with the institutions and policies that affect their behavior and performance. The innovation system approach acknowledges that multiple knowledge bases exist within such a system, and when numerous stakeholders are involved, conflicting goals may exist. As a result, the innovation system approach takes a holistic view that looks to address overall patterns and relationships rather than limiting attention to smaller micro-elements, with human and organizational issues also being addressed. Adopting a systems-based approach like the innovation system may help to clarify what is required to adopt new renewable energy technologies and avoid the mistakes of the past. Finally, I'd just like to acknowledge that this project has been supported with financial contribution from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine under the SEAI National Energy Research Development and Demonstration Funding Programme in 2018. Thank you.
Dr. Geoghegan, thank you very much indeed for that intriguing presentation. We're going to move on now with our next presentation from Dr. Dave Stiles at the University of Limerick. Dave is a lecturer in the Bio School of Engineering at UL, and he specialises in the cycle assessment of bio-based systems, and he formerly worked with the EPA. So Dr. Stiles, good afternoon to you, and it's over to you.
Good afternoon, and thanks very much, Damien. So firstly, I'm going to check if the technology works here. I'm going to talk about on-farm anaerobic digestion today and the role that it could play in moving towards climate neutrality at the sectoral level. And this is based on some work we've done over the years in various institutions. So firstly, I'll talk about the climate neutrality challenge, because that's the target, if you like. That's the long-term goal that we need to get to. And that challenge is about trying to drive down methane emissions by a large amount, not to zero, but probably somewhere between 30 to 80% in order to achieve climate neutrality. So we need to get that big reduction in methane at the national level. And then we need to balance our CO2 and our nitrous oxide emissions. So we need to drive down nitrous oxide emissions as far as we possibly can. And then we need to offset all remaining nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide emissions with carbon dioxide removal. And these points about methane and carbon dioxide removal are very important with respect to anaerobic digestion, because it has a role to play as a technology in both those things, in reducing methane from manure management, but also potentially in the long term in being part of bioenergy carbon capture and storage. So the interesting aspect about anaerobic digestion, if we think about the environmental balance, it's a technology that sits at the interface of multiple systems. So we can put an anaerobic digester in at a farm scale, and that will take manures, it might take crops, it might take food waste, and it will digest it, and it will produce energy. And that energy could be in a combined heat and power system to produce electricity to go to the grid, or it could be that the methane is upgraded into biomethane that can be used for transport, or can be injected into the natural gas grid and used for heating somewhere. So we've got multiple pathways of energy use. We also produce digestate, which is a biofertilizer, and that can help displace synthetic fertilizers. So in addition to various emissions that we have from the system, and potentially from the production of feedstock, if we're producing grass and maize to go into the digester, we've got lots of so-called credits, and these are emissions we can avoid by substituting fossil energy, substituting electricity from the grid, substituting petrol and diesel transport fuels, substituting natural gas as a heating fuel. And we can also avoid other ways of managing wastes, which can be more emitting. We can avoid conventional manure management. We can also potentially avoid conventional management of food waste, which can lead to lots of emissions. So in this way, anaerobic digestion can actually generate lots of credits if we manage it properly, but there are also risks and emissions, which we'll talk about in this presentation. Apologies, I'm just getting my clicker on my phone to come up again. So this is some work that we did recently, trying to look at the environmental performance by different feedstock types. We can put all sorts of different types of feedstock, from crops through to manures or food wastes and others, into anaerobic digesters. And we can generate different types of energy. So when we did this based on this was in a UK context, based on current kind of displacement factors for electricity and transport fuels, etc., we found that the best way of using the biogas was to replace transport fuels. That gave us the biggest credits, the biggest, you see the green bars below zero on the y-axis, those are credits, they're avoided emissions. So that was one of the best ways of using the biogas from anaerobic digestion. We have different performance across different feedstocks. That partly reflects the fact that this is on a fresh matter basis, and some feedstocks are quite wet, so we don't get as much energy out of them. But something to note is that the avoided manure management and waste management credits were actually bigger for those feedstocks where they applied than the avoided energy credits. So that's to say that anaerobic digestion can be even more beneficial in terms of waste management than it can for energy generation. And that's something that we need to bear in mind if we try to optimize how we deploy anaerobic digestion in the future and which feedstocks that we put into it. Another point is that the economies of scale are quite challenging for anaerobic digestion at farm level. And another point is that the efficiencies of anaerobic digesters tend to be much lower when they're small. You can see in the graph on the right that small digesters have a much lower conversion of biogas production potential into energy. In this case, it was electricity generation from combined heat and power plants. So there's a kind of trade-off, if you like. Small-scale digesters are less efficient, but they might be more likely to accept waste feedstocks and manures at the farm level. So there's a kind of challenge there, if you like, in trying to optimize the performance of AD between the large-scale efficiency that we might want to see for the energy conversion versus the small-scale use of waste products and manures going into the digesters, and also the efficient use of that digestate, because we can't transport that digestate very far for it to be used. It's too full of water and it's not valuable enough to transport long distances. So we've got this challenge for optimizing AD deployment in a way which is sustainable. And one approach that's been proposed to address this challenge and to maximize the benefits of small-scale digestion with large-scale energy conversion is the hub and pod approach, where you can produce the biogas on the farm, collect it and transport it to a centralized location where you can either burn it or upgrade it in large facilities that are much more efficient. And potentially by doing that in the future, we could also link it with bioenergy carbon capture and storage, which is the way to lock up that biogenic carbon long term. An important point is that there's a lot of discussion about using grass in digesters, and that can be fine insofar as it can help to maximize the amount of manure and waste that we put in digesters to keep the balance of feedstock through the year. But using anaerobic digestion as an energy conversion technology for grass is hugely land inefficient compared with other options. As you can see, we can get much greater, orders of magnitude greater energy production and greenhouse gas mitigation per hectare from wind turbines, from solar PV panels. In terms of GHG emission, we can achieve much more with forestry. And even with miscanthus, we can achieve better energy balance and greenhouse gas balance. So treating anaerobic digestion only as an energy conversion technology for grass is not an efficient strategy. Digestate is potentially a resource, but it's also a pollutant potentially, because we have lots of emissions of ammonia and methane coming off that digestate. And especially if it's managed at small scale on farms where we don't have secondary digesters, we have a lot of residual methane coming off the stored digestate. And that can be a problem if we're putting in grass or maize, because that's methane that would never see in the atmosphere if we hadn't gone through the AD process. It's not such a big problem if it's residual emissions from manure, because that would have been emitting anyway. So we need to take care of how we manage that digestate. And one possible option is that we upgrade it by extracting with ammonium sulfate and with struvite the phosphorus and the nitrogen in that digestate to produce convenient pellet fertilizers that can be applied as and when needed. And that can be a way of really reducing the overall emissions from digestate use, especially the nitrogen emissions, the ammonia emissions, which are very high. Another thing to consider is that in the future, we might have different substitution credits because we'll have a different grid electricity mix. So the interesting thing that we found with some recent research is that whilst grid electricity might have a much lower carbon footprint in the future, the option of burning that biogas in large-scale combined heat and power plants potentially could be linked with bioenergy carbon capture and storage. And that's the yellow part of the bars below zero on the y-axis you can see on the left-hand side. And that credit can mean that you get better outcomes from using that biogas in the future for electricity generation or for large-scale heat generation, where you can link it with carbon capture, than you would for substituting transport fuels, because in the future we anticipate high electrification of transport. So it's just something to be aware of, because we're talking about long investment periods for things like anaerobic digesters. We need to think about how they're going to perform in 20 years' time, not just next year. And that could be a little bit different depending on how bioenergy carbon capture and storage comes to play in the future. So in conclusion, apologies, I can't actually read the writing because of my screen, so I'm going to try and remember what I wrote down for my conclusions, which was there's a very important role for anaerobic digestion to play in the future, but we need to think carefully about how we deploy it. There's a high potential to abate manure methane, which is going to be very important for climate neutrality targets. We can also substitute synthetic fertilizer and transport fuel emissions. AD crops are not land efficient, so we should be very careful about how we use crops and grass in anaerobic digesters, but some might be justified if it means we can digest more manures especially. Digestate needs to be stored and applied with care, and there may be an opportunity to biorefine this digestate, not just to get the fertilizer out in a form that can be used more easily and with less pollution, but to get other high-value compounds out from the volatile fatty acids that the digestate is rich in. Long-term bioenergy carbon capture and storage could transform the way that the anaerobic digesters perform, and that could mean that they become a really important part of the climate neutrality solution, and that might favour large-scale combustion of that biogas in ways that that carbon can be captured. Small-scale anaerobic digestion is expensive and less efficient, and one way of overcoming that could be this hub and pod concept, to combine the benefits of small-scale manure digestion with large-scale energy conversion. So I hope I haven't gone over time, and thanks very much for your attention.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. Dave Stiles there at UL. Thank you for your detailed presentation and for joining us on today's webinar. And I think listening to both presentations so far, we certainly now know that there are amazing opportunities there for farmers, and we're in a real win-win-win situation. We're in a win situation for renewables because, well, we're in a bit of a fuel crisis, and all of us know if we're filling our cars with fuel or heating our homes at the moment, we really do need alternatives and renewables. And there's a win, obviously, for farmers as well, because farmers into the future are going to be looking for alternatives for their land use as times change, with all of the demands that are happening at European and national level. And of course, there is a win for the environment as well. So We're going to focus now in our next part of today's event with our panel to look at the opportunities for farmers. And if you're a farmer tuned in or a landowner tuned in, you're going to be very interested in hearing from our next guest. Barry Caslin is Teagasc Energy and Rural Development Specialist. And of course, Barry will be very well known because his work is in the area of renewables with Teagasc. Pat Smyth is with Land Power. It's, yes, it is Local Power. Sorry about that, Pat. Pat, of course, is the Managing Director of Local Power and well known indeed to a lot of our viewers here today as the former General Secretary of the Irish Farmers Association. We're also joined here by Dr. Maurice Deegan, and Maurice is working on the Fleet project with Teagasc, which is looking at anaerobic digestion, and look forward to hearing how he's getting on with that. And David Hagen of Devenish. David is the Sustainable Agricultural Manager helping Devenish, and the area that he's working on at the moment is do more with less. You're all very welcome. Good afternoon to our guests who are joining us virtually. Barry, can I begin with you and to that question about what is out there for farmers? There's been a lot of false starts in this whole area over the years, as we know, but right now we're at a pivotal time for the environment and for farmers' futures as well. So with all the talk that there is about the climate emergency, what opportunities and what technologies are there to help farmers?
Good afternoon, Damien. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening out there, Damien, and I suppose if you look across Europe, a lot of things happening right across Europe and globally in the whole area of renewables, a lot of it driven by the whole climate agenda as well, and rightly so, because actually the inclusion of energy efficiency and renewables makes a lot of sense from a profitability perspective as well. And I suppose if you divide it into different areas, I suppose if we take solar, first of all, you know, there's a lot of schemes that are there now, like the TAMS, from the Department of Agriculture, the Targeted Agriculture Modernisation Scheme, and SEI supports. They've improved the returns and shortened the repayment period for new solar PV schemes. You know, for larger scale projects, you have the likes of the RES, that's the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. That's created a lot of opportunities for farmers to effectively lease their land out for long periods of time, maybe for 25-year plus, to solar developers. And there's a lot of activity around this, you know, comparatively low risk technology. And the farm businesses most likely to benefit from those are those with high and consistent electricity usage. You know, people with maybe potato cold stores, poultry units, pig units, and dairy farms as well can also benefit from solar. And we'll be hearing from Dinny, Galvin later on about that, and he's a lot of practical examples of where solar PV has been included in dairy situations. I'm sure Pat will be talking about that as well after a while. And the cost of the technology, of solar technology, has gone down quite significantly over the last 5 or 6 years as well. So that's adding to the shortening the payback period as well. In terms of, I suppose, you know, the TAMS grants were reviewed there in July of this year. So that's actually improved things as well and being more realistic about the true costs associated with solar PV. And I suppose another area that's been driven mainly by the likes of the RES scheme is wind, and you see a lot of development on onshore wind technologies. And it was probably the hardest hit sector in terms of public attitudes over more recent years. I suppose for very few new projects were really being built at large scale, but planning remains probably one of the biggest hurdles there in terms of renewable, that particular renewable technology. But the RES has resulted in a significant increase in onshore projects being discussed with developers. They're looking to sign up landowners onto maybe longer term 2-year or 3-year option periods and sign up exclusivity agreements and heads of terms, and which effectively will become long-term lease agreements between the developer and the farmer. So it's just the areas that farmers probably are asking a lot of questions about at the moment is, you know, should they be signing these forms, these heads of terms, these exclusivity agreements? And there's a lot of advice to be given in that area as well. But like the turbines, Damien, have changed so much over the last number of years. You know, previously we've seen 2 megawatt turbines. They're measuring maybe up to 80 meters up to the tip. but now you can have 4 to 5 megawatt turbines that can be 175 meters right to the tip. So that presents planning challenges on sites. Sites tend to be quite remote and upland or hilly type areas. The technology that was discussed here by David is, we haven't really seen much activity on anaerobic digestion in Ireland at this point. And don't forget, all these technologies require some level of support for them to, to be realistic. And AD is no different, because, wind or solar there wouldn't be any activity there at the moment if there wasn't TAMS grants or SEAI grants. There wouldn't be any activity for the larger scale, 20, 100 acre plus projects for farm scale solar or large scale wind if there wasn't a RES scheme, a renewable electricity support scheme. So all of these technologies require a level of support to make them viable. But there's been very little activity on AD, and there's been very little support for this particular sector. But I do feel that AD will be a key technology in meeting our renewable targets. And I know that the likes of Gas Networks Ireland, they're doing a lot of work in this area, because we need renewable gas in our energy mix. And Gas Networks Ireland, they have a target that they want 20% renewable gas in the mix by 2030. And that's a big challenge coming from where we are today, where there's no renewable gas. And renewable gas can only really be produced with farmers providing feedstocks, such as grass silage, slurries. So there's opportunities there in the future for farmers to be supplying these feedstocks for digesters. It mightn't be their own particular digester, but it may be on a centralized anaerobic digester that farmers maybe have the opportunity of feeding in material to. There will be sustainability requirements as part of the Renewable Energy Directive on this, because we don't want to see situations where there's long-term pasture for maybe 50 or 60 years, all of a sudden being ploughed up to put in grass for AD units. So I think this has to be managed quite well in terms of, and there will be, the Renewable Energy Directive does have very specific sustainability requirements and there will be a high proportion of waste material going into these digesters. So that'll be waste that otherwise would be disposed of, releasing methane into the atmosphere. So I think that'll be another help for AD. And AD, as David mentioned there, was typically in the past, you see it in Germany, there's over 9,000 digesters there now at this stage. Most of those digesters are CHP, or combined heat and power, producing heat and electricity. And that heat would be used maybe for a local school, maybe a local swimming pool. The electricity would be sent off to the grid. I think that the direction of travel here in Ireland looks to be a bit different, that we won't be going down the route of CHP, but we'll be taking that raw biogas. Yeah. So raw biogas that is produced in a digester that could produce heat and power, that biogas can be cleaned up and taken out the carbon dioxide, taken out the hydrogen sulfide, water vapor, those gases, and you're cleaning it up to have over 97% methane in the mix. And that's the same as propane gas, and that propane gas can be included in our gas grid, and that's where we're getting our renewable gas from. So I think agriculture will have a major role to play in this move to biomethane. And I think with the soaring gas prices that we see globally at the moment, and the fact that we're at the end of the gas pipeline from a European perspective, we really need to have a clear focus and a strategy of developing an indigenous gas supply, because around 30% of our primary energy needs at the moment is from natural gas.
Yeah. Okay, Barry, thanks. Can I just, we'll come back to some of those, but I just want to at this stage maybe bring in some of our other guests here, and we will come back to some of the issues that you raised there. But I want to move on to Pat Smyth. Pat, you're also chairman of the Micro Renewable Energy Federation as well, and CEO of Local Power. Just listening to Barry there talking about the raft of opportunities that are out there for farmers in terms of solar, which is your area. What sort of interaction are you having with farmers, and what sort of opportunities are there for farmers in the whole area of solar energy?
Thanks, Damien, and good afternoon to your guests. You're in Shelburne Hall there, Damien, and just above you there's 100 kilowatts of solar PV that Local Power installed 2 years ago that's generating over 20,000 euros a year of energy for the RDS. I see solar PV as a technology that's going to be deployed on every home, farm and business in the country. It's going to be driven, Damien, by economics in the first instance. The paybacks, assuming that we can get support from the SAEI or the Department of Agriculture, can be between 4 and 6 years. And the technology can last for decades if it's chosen wisely. This year, for example, we will have built out about 3 megawatts of solar. About a third of that is on farms. And as Barry said, the objective is to size the system so that most of the energy consumed is consumed in the business. But good news is on the way. ESB Networks are about to announce this month a grid connection agreement that's going to allow homes, businesses and farms to connect to the grid. There's going to be quite a lot of regulations and rules around it, but it's the first time that this has happened in Ireland in a meaningful way. It's long overdue, but it's welcome. And I think for the farming community, particularly those who have their own transformer, it's going to present an opportunity to generate more of their own energy and to export the surplus to the grid. And my hope is that the Department of Environment, that they make it as easy as possible for people to apply, and also that the economics work, because farmers and businesses and homes, there has to be a reasonable payback. But the benefits of solar PV is that the energy is very predictable, unlike wind. It is in a bell-shaped curve in line with many dairy farm use, for example, during the year. Unless the sky falls in, you'll have generation of solar PV every day. And I think that it's a sustainability measure that farmers can deploy that's visual, that reduces carbon emissions, and that reduces the bill.
Yeah, and Pat, it sounds like a real no-brainer, of course, but I presume there are stumbling blocks, and one of them that I can think of offhand, whether you're a farmer or not, when it comes to renewables and when it comes to going greener, is while there are grants out there, there's no such thing as 100% grant. We need money in the first place to be able to invest. So what sort of tweaks are required at government level to make solar PV more attractive to all of us, but indeed specifically to farmers?
I think, Damien, that the banks are willing to lend the balance. They know that there's a huge investment to be made by Ireland and all the stakeholders if Ireland's targets are to be met. I think that the key message I'd have for officials is that their support is very welcome, but it needs to be simplified. It just appears to me, and indeed the people that I represent in the renewable energy business, and indeed in other sectors, that the bureaucracy around attaining grants and while we know there has to be oversight, it's gone too far. It should be simple to apply for a grant. There should be no complications. Effectively, the feedback that has to be given should be warranted, but it shouldn't be over the top. And I think that the message has to be, we're here to help, and to help you get this extra support that you need to make a project viable, rather than putting one hurdle after the other in your way. And not to and certainly it's something in my previous role that I many times raised with the department. But certainly when talking to farmers are very, very slow, for example, to go for grants in some circumstances, because they get frustrated at the level of paperwork and the level of checking that has to be done. And sometimes the benefit is defeated by the extra bureaucracy. Okay,
and I want to move on to David, but just briefly, while I have you, Pat, on the issue of bureaucracy and hurdles, what about planning? Is it an issue?
Damien, I'm 3 years lobbying to get planning exclusions for solar PV introduced. In the UK, you can put 6,000 square meters of solar PV on a roof without planning. In this country, you can put 50 square meters on a roof without planning today. I was being promised by 3 ministers that this would be sorted. I'm hopeful that we're nearly there. In fact, I was on to the Department of Planning this morning to see where the issue was. 3 years later, something that's not going to cost the government a euro cent, it still hasn't been delivered. And the message that is sending to me and to the people that I represent is that we're all for climate change, but the ambition is not matched by action and urgency.
Okay, David Hagen of Devenish, I want to bring you in at this point. We've heard an awful lot over the last 40 minutes or so about anaerobic digestion. We don't see an awful lot of it. We hear an awful lot about it. But certainly it seems now that we are getting serious and that we're going to see maybe a lot more development in this area in the years ahead. And we'll talk to Maurice about his work presently. But just in relation to the concerns that dairy farmers in particular might have about competition for feedstocks, as in grass, is that a genuine concern you're hearing?
Good afternoon, Damien, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, that is a genuine concern that we are hearing on the ground, that people are concerned about maybe what anaerobic digestion in the locality, what it would do for feedstocks. However, in the report that myself and KPMG did for Gas Networks Ireland, what we found actually there are low-hanging fruit. There's low-hanging fruit there, and actually by focusing on beef farms in Ireland. And the two examples that I'll give are, one, only 20% of soils in Ireland are optimised for fertility. So this is the basics of agriculture. So there is a massive opportunity there to produce more sustainable grass. And also what we're looking at, and what we looked at in the report, is actually incremental growth of grass. So we're not looking at maximising the growth of grass, but if you look at the average beef farm in Ireland, on average produces 6 tonnes per hectare of dry matter. What we're doing in aligning with the Grass 10 project with Teagasc is, can we bring that up to 10 tonne of grass grown per hectare, grown per hectare? And the other thing that we showed in the project too is, by looking at 750,000 hectares of grassland in Ireland. So we're only taking 750,000 out of 4.5 million hectares of grassland in Ireland, that there is the potential to produce 9.6 terawatt hours of biomethane that we can use to have an indigenous source of gas in Ireland. So what we are not looking at this as like competition at all within the agricultural sector. And in fact, for the dairy farmers, we are looking at this then as they can supply slurry in. So they can, at a local level, you can supply your slurry in. When we use that in the RED, so the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe, what this is doing is this is capturing the methane off that, which otherwise would be released to the atmosphere in slurry storage. So we are actually making a substance that is methane positive, methane negative, and therefore helping the greenhouse gas balance of the agricultural industry. So far from being antagonistic to the dairy industry, we see this as being positive for all sections of the agricultural industry.
When you're out and about talking to farmers, what are they asking you in relation to the whole sustainability question? Are they becoming more interested in it, and what sort of advice are you giving to farmers to be more sustainable on their farms?
Well, there is any amount of appetite out there at the minute for sustainable agriculture and sustainability on farm. I suppose what I generally see on farm is a lot of curiosity. People want to understand the business cases, and then also what it would mean to them, and look, how do they invest into the future on that. So they're the big things we're seeing on the ground. But again, I'm bringing it back and maybe focusing again maybe on the beef farmer. Like currently, if we look at the latest Teagasc National Farm figures or National Farm Survey figures, what we are seeing is your average income is either 9 or 14,000, depending on which system you're in, and also that you're about 40% of beef farmers in Ireland are classified as vulnerable. So what we're seeing with anaerobic digestion technology, by partitioning a part of the farm, so they still would maintain their production of beef, but by better management, correcting your soil nutrition, that they can grow incrementally more forage, and that forage would act as a second income source when supplied to a local digester. So the effect will be that, look, you're economically securing these farms, and you're not having with the use of multi-species forwards, which what we're doing in Devenish, you're actually impacting positively on the local biodiversity. And we at Ireland, our energy balance, we will be satisfying our own energy use internally and creating that indigenous biomethane. So look, from what we can see, and our analysis is showing, we can comply with the RED 2 protocol, produce native bioenergy, and economically enhance beef farmers within Ireland. So we have a lot of interest in this in AD for the sustainability factors.
Okay, and that brings me neatly on to Maurice, who's with me here, Dr. Maurice Deesy. It's great to have somebody here beside me in the aforementioned Shelburne Hall. It's all very quiet here ahead of a big match later on tonight, just outside. But on the issue there of sustainability and anaerobic digestion, what sort of a role, what is the potential contribution of AD to the sustainability of agriculture into the future?
Well, I think it has a huge role to play. And even on a higher level for farmers these days, we seem to be always in the press with a negative light being shone on us for emissions. And using anaerobic digestion, we could start reducing our emissions. So slurry is about 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So we could capture the methane from that and generate heat or electricity or biomethane for transport down towards 2050. So I think that's a very positive news story. And particularly for farmers listening, you'll be involved in a positive change, not just negative press. And then in terms of sustainability, I see anaerobic digestion playing a huge part in terms of nutrient management. So there's many farmers who have an awful lot of nutrients, some are lacking it. And particularly if it's on farm or if it's in a co-op model, there could be a sharing of nutrients to areas that have concentration to areas that have less. And particularly with digestate, you can increase the availability of the nutrients in the slurry, and you can also increase the nitrogen content. So with soaring nitrogen prices, that's a good news story. So that's, to me, I think nutrient management and managing of waste is a very important part of anaerobic digestion.
What are the key findings of your project Fleet? It's a 3-year project, I believe, that you're embarking there on in Galway, and I think Dr. Fiona Thorne is involved with it as well. So what have you discovered, or can you share any information with us at this stage?
Well, we're early days yet, but I think the key thing that we've been kind of finding so far is that I don't see anaerobic digestion competing with farming and conventional farming. I think the returns should always be better for producing food. I think that's a societal need. But I think there can be a space for complementary technology. And that is where taking the waste, the slurries from grassland or from your cattle-based system and digesting it and generating energy. So then they'd complement the food system. So I think that's got a very important role to play. But I also think actually, even looking at the Devenish report, we can produce more forage than we can actually feed to animals. So what can we do with the excess? Can we feed the excess from fertile soils that are in the correct condition? Can we feed the excess grass in to drive the economics of the gas production? So as the taxpayer gets bang for buck in terms of investment of supporting AD, that we generate enough gas to make a sizable contribution to society. And
it would be summarised or categorised as clean energy?
It would, yeah. It depends on how much. The more waste you use, the more positive it is. So that it would be my view that the more waste slurries we use, the better it is. Energy crops, and particularly maize, would have a negative view because you're leaving the soil bare over winter, things like that. Those aren't positives. But if there's excess and wastes, I think those are very positive. And that's why grass, you and I can't eat grass, but okay, so we can generate grass from it. That's okay.
Right, okay. Barry Caslin, just coming back to you on that, where are we with this technology? Who's going to drive AD development? Is it going to be from the ground up? Not to mix metaphors as such, but is it going to be driven by farmers? Is it going to be driven by policy? How is it going to actually work?
Yeah, it's going to require policy, Damien, to get the whole thing moving along. And I suppose there's no policy instrument there at the moment. What we've seen in Germany was they brought in a renewable energy feed-in tariff, and that's where you got paid per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour of electricity being produced. In other countries, they brought in capital grants towards the cost of anaerobic digesters. Denmark have gone for larger scale digesters, which would be bigger than your typical farm scale one that you see in Germany. In Denmark, you'd have centralized anaerobic digesters where a number of farmers would pool together their slurries, bring them into one digester, and to take back the digestate afterwards and apply it onto their land. So you can have different types of systems. But there seems to be, I suppose, the journey of travel that I mentioned earlier on that we seem to be on is not for CHP, but it seems to be for biomethane, and that we'd be producing this biogas, cleaning the gas, upgrading it, and injecting it into our national gas grid. And that's going to require a support mechanism. And what we're hearing at the moment is there's been a consultation out there over the summer on the renewable heat obligation, the RHO, and that's expected to stimulate the market for renewable gas by mandating the suppliers of fuel in the heat sector to have a portion of their fuel coming from renewable sources. And this has already been done with the biofuels, the liquid biofuels. So that's why you're already getting a proportion of your petrol, some ethanol mixed through it. It's pre-blended. You get your diesel at the pumps. There's an element of biodiesel mixed through that as well. And that something similar, an obligation on the gas suppliers to have a proportion of renewable gas in the mix will be there. That's expected to start in 2023, and it's going to increase incrementally. The percentage of blend by 2030 is expected to be up around 3%. So currently, I suppose agricultural-based biomethane is among the cheapest options for renewable alternatives to fossil fuels in the heat sector. So I think that will be the journey of travel. And the 2030 target equates to something around 1.6 terawatt hours of renewable heat. So if you assume that a typical anaerobic digester plant in Ireland that's going to have a biomethane output of around 20 gigawatt hours, that would mean that we need in the region of around 80 farm scale plants by 2030. And those farm scale plants will require a mixture of waste material. They'll require, slurry. I think David would have the figures better there, but I think it's something in the region of 400 hectares of forage feedstock that's going to be sourced within 10 kilometres of the plant, and 16,000 tonnes of slurry sourced within 3 to 5 kilometres of these plants is what's envisaged here.
Okay, David, do you just want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with the figures that Barry have said there. We agree with those figures, and look, getting them in the locality. Obviously, look, there are technologies we can apply. Maybe that will expand that circle a bit. So looking at maybe dewatering slurry on site, etc. And I think that's where you're making it more energy rich, making it easier to transport. But they're the 80 plants with around 400 hectares or 1,000 hectares of forage requirement each. And that's looking at forage only. We would then hoping that in localities they could be augmented then with more energy-rich sources that would be opportunities that would come up locally. So we would have local opportunities there.
Okay, Pat Smyth, the microgeneration scheme is due to go to government in June of next year, I believe. What will this mean for farmers?
Damien, I hope it'll be in a little bit earlier than that, but we'll have to wait and see. It's going to mean that farmers will be able to apply for grid connection for up to 50 kilowatts. Now, that will be for a limited number of farmers, because most farmers have much lower sized transformers feeding their farms. But they will be able to, a single phase farmer will be able to export up to 6 kilowatts an hour and get paid for that without having to apply for grid connection. A 3-phase farmer will be able to export up to 11 kilowatts per hour without having to apply for a grid connection. And anyone that wants to apply for grid connection above that, there's going to be a simple mechanism found for up to 50 kilowatts. And I'm advised that they're working on a scheme in 2023 to expand on that. So it's a complex enough process because electricity is a little bit like water, and it'll flow to where there's a blockage. So the assessment that will be done by ESB networks will adjudicate very quickly whether a farmer, whether it has the existing supply, has capacity to take the export, because I don't envisage there's going to be economic to upgrade the local network in order to facilitate a grid connection. So what's going to happen is that there'll be lots of interest, but the grid will become a limiting factor in due course, and the early movers are more likely to get grid access. So all farmers need to just watch the space, and if they have an ambition of exporting energy to the grid, well, then they need to move reasonably quickly. But I do think that it's going to be a big plus, because one of the concerns that farmers have today is that if they put in a significant solar PV system and then they're exporting to the grid and they're getting nothing for it, that it impacts on the economics. But if they can now get paid for any surplus export to the grid, it makes the economics of solar PV work very well. And this is going to be a benefit to businesses who are closed at the weekends and schools and places like that. So it's a positive move. And I think the message that I just want to repeat is keep it simple, make the rules easily understandable, support the investment required, and help people, and being seen to help people to socialise this technology, because it's great technology. It is very low maintenance, and it works.
Okay.
All right. Can I just make a point there?
Yes, Barry.
Just in relation to that a key point that we should be always making at these type of events is energy efficiency. That we cut the kilowatt hour of electricity that's required to be produced, whether it's coming from the grid or whether it's coming from a renewable energy technology on site. That we need to be as energy efficient as possible, and that could be simple as a farmer, putting in a variable speed drive in a milking parlour, essentially cutting the kilowatt hours of electricity that's required for the process. And it's then that you look at the renewable technology, whether it's solar, whether it's solar thermal, solar PV, whatever it may be on the farm, or a heat pump, or whatever it may be, that you cut the kilowatt hours first. And I think any farm business that's considering investing in solar should carefully tailor the project to the annual energy profile of the business. So as Pat mentioned there, this scheme will come, and we've been waiting for this for quite some time, as Pat will allude to. And this is all going to come of a sudden, and people will say, right, what do we do now, and what's the payment rates, and what's the payback on this type of investment? And it's good to be prepared for all of this, because to know what the energy load is on your farm, maybe to deal with some of these solar companies that are that are out there at the moment, and to maybe get an energy engineer on site to see what exactly are you using, or even looking at your own ESB bills, seeing how many kilowatt hours are you using per month, per year, and it's from that then you can determine how to size it, because the sizing of these is very important.
Sure.
Solar makes sense, but the decision making process is much more in depth, and so you start by looking at how and where the electricity is used, how you can improve your energy efficiency, and then you look at which renewable energy solution and specification best meets the profile of electricity.
It's a big decision. Look, we have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go round the table, as it were, and just ask you one important question at the moment to you first, Maurice, and that is that as we look to the future, we have the carbon budget now. Agriculture has to reduce its emissions by between 20 and 30% or thereabouts. We have the Green Deal, we have the Farm to Fork, we've Ag Climatised. There's just a plethora of things coming down the road to obviously try and help Ireland reduce its carbon footprint, and there's going to be a big onus on farmers. Are you optimistic that all of those targets can be met, that we can indeed keep the three plates of the environment, rural economies and farmers' livelihoods, sustainability spinning at the same time?
Yeah, I'd be very optimistic. Things like multi-species swards, using more clover, we can cut our inputs and improve our output. So it's going to take investment, and these are new technologies. There's going to be... We've used the existing technologies for years. We know them very well. Now we're going to step into a new world with new technologies, and there are chances for slip-ups. And that's where we will need support to try and do this. But I think it'll be worth it. I think we can achieve it. And towards 2050, getting to zero, yeah. It's exciting.
David Hagen, to you, getting to that 2050 to zero net carbon, how important will renewables be in all of that for farmers?
Look, it's going to be very, very important. And look, I agree with, we've all said it in this panel, is that it's going to be a mixture of efficiencies, existing technologies, and then new innovations. So taking the best of the old and mixing with the new innovation. One thing about human beings, when we set our minds on something, we will achieve it. So look, this is the only challenge, say the climate challenge, and so when we put our mind to it, we will come up with the solutions, and we will get the solutions there. And look, it's up to us then to engage with society to get them used and to reap the benefit of them.
And Pat Smyth, are these targets, putting on, I suppose, your former hat as being a lobbyist on behalf of farmers as well, do you think that those targets that are in front of farmers, that they can be met if, I suppose, the likes of your business is working alongside them?
Damien, if you look at the farming community and what they've had to adapt to over the last number of decades, it gives me confidence anyway that the farming community will adopt and they will change and they will do everything in their power to achieve the targets that's been set. And I think they can do it without reducing food production. I think the challenge is for the science and for the research to be done to assist them, and for the officials to work with them and to try and put in place meaningful measures such as supports for anaerobic digestion and biomethane and biofertilizer production, so to assist them. So I'm very confident. I don't think if we fail, it won't be because of farming.
Okay, and finally to you, Barry Caslin, 30 seconds. Can these targets be achieved?
I think they can, Damien. There's hurdles in the way. Those hurdles need to be removed. We're faced into very exciting times, and these exciting times will offer opportunities to many to be part of this change in terms of decarbonisation and renewable energy generation. So I'm very optimistic.
Okay, well, Barry, thank you very much for that. We're going to leave the last word in this section with you, but Barry will be back at the very end of this session in a little under an hour or so. But to my guests, to Maurice, who's here with me, to Pat and to David, and indeed to Barry, thank you all for your insights and your inputs on that first session. And we look forward to seeing you in the future again. Okay, well, we're going to move on to our next section now, and we're going to be talking about farm renewable energy, obviously, is what we're talking about, but making it happen, farmland renewable energy. And our next presentation is coming from a farmer. Dinny Galvin, he is the ambassador for the ESB Network's Dingle project. He's a farmer in Dingle Bay, well, not in the bay, but close by, and in a nice part of the world as well. He's a cattle and sheep farmer. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about what he's doing on his land down there in Dingle. So Dinny, I'm going to hand over to you in the lovely kingdom.
Thank you, Damien. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm an ambassador on the Dingle ESB project, and as part of that, I got involved with the Dingle Hub in Dingle, and they are very working very much with the farming community there, and they did an energy master plan back there 2 years ago. As part of the master plan, 54% of all the energy was being used on transport, and 49% of emissions were coming from agriculture. And 80% of the people, decided, put out their view that we need to look at some sorts of renewable energy. As you can see there, the peninsula is sticking out into the sea, 48 kilometers long, and you're talking about 583 square miles in total. So on from that, the next slide there would be the West Kerry dairy farmers, and I completed a community energy mentor course, and there was a lot of speakers came to us, and I was the only dairy farmer on that course, and there was a lot of negativity about farmers and dairy farmers, and the national herd should be called completely. So that didn't go down too well with me, and I decided I'd try to set up an SEC, a sustainable energy community, through the SEAI, and we had great buy-in from the farming community, and they wanted to get involved. It's been supported by the SEAI and Kerry Agri, the ESB, and Geoghegan Genetics as well. And look, we are in the process of doing our EMP at the moment. We have D6 consulting hired to do our EMP. As part of that, if you look at the center of the graph there, there's a Watchtrix device that's installed on 9 of the 100 dairy farms. And I have an app on my phone. I can see exactly what it's costing me to milk the cows, cool the milk, heat the water, and it's a very, very valuable tool. In fact, I go as far as to say every dairy farm in the country should have this, because it makes you aware of what you're using, when you're using it, and most importantly, what it's costing you. And what we've seen to date is energy efficiency is very, very important. And look, Barry mentioned there, variable speed vacuum pumps and motors, heat recovery. I see heat recovery on my own farm here is playing a vital role. I put it in back in 2013, and that's reducing the electricity for heating the water considerably. Our goal will be to put everything together. We'll be making our submissions now shortly to the SEAI. We feel very, very strongly about PV as well. PV has a major solar panels, PV electricity panels have a major role to play in creating renewable electricity. Yes, use as much as we can of it on farm. And yes, we are looking as a community of farmers, which is, to me, is very, very important, because the farming community have always given back to the local GAA, the schools, the local community centre. I wouldn't be a fan of leasing out big amount of land to some big solar company. I believe money should be kept locally within the farming community. The farmers are willing to be involved in this, use as much power as they can. And yes, through the RDSS, we have registered the group, and we'd be hoping to sell extra electricity back to the grid. We're not trying to make a fortune out of that, but like I say, I think we can support our own communities, maybe create a few jobs here and there. Another thing that would be important is we'd have a lot of low-lying land, some of us, and there should be an opportunity to put PV panels on that. There's bifacial PV panels in the market as well, where you capture the sun rising in the east, and you get it, and you get the sun going down in the west. Now, there'd be two pluses with that, because you could leave the underneath of the panels go back to the biodiversity as well, and that would be a carbon sequestration there. Carbon emissions are very important to us. We believe we can take control of our own emissions, and we can take control of our own destiny. Could you move on to the next slide for me, please? There are the options and for the PVs, and you can have a read through them there. And if you move on again, please. We have a fabulous feasibility study. I'm very impressed listening to all these lads on anaerobic digestion. We have a fabulous feasibility study done by the Dingle Hub on anaerobic digestion. We believe there's potential for an anaerobic digester on the peninsula. We believe we could use most of the energy, the biogas, in transport. It costs $2,500 to convert an agricultural tractor to burn gas rather than diesel. And we believe we could keep all that fuel within the peninsula. You have different options. You have transport for tractors. You have the marine. You have commercial truck and van fleets. There's marine tours. There'd be boats going out from Dingle fishing, and there's marine tours. All that gas could be used for that. Of course, there's an option for district heating. So that's a fabulous feasibility study there done by the Dingle Hub. It would be great for us in a place where there's high rainfall, because, look, we could take our slurry in there. I know you have to balance the feedstocks. And look, there's other pluses. There's food waste from the Dingle Peninsula, which has pre-COVID, a tourism. 1.2 million people come onto the peninsula during the summer, so like that's a lot of food waste. And there's a possibility probably for an abattoir where the offal could go into this as well. And farm to fork is very important to us here. At one time there were 7 small abattoirs on the peninsula. Now our nearest abattoir is Killarney. So there's a great potential there. We believe there's great potential there as well. If you could move on again for me, please. Another thing that's happening here, another project is a Plutus project. It's there's 12 or 13 of these all over Europe, and our Irish one is there inside in the middle. Again, a lot of credit due to Devenish, the manager in the Dingle hub, and her team. And this has been rolled out to 30 farmers in the peninsula, where the smart technology is being deployed on the farms. And we have weather stations, we have sensors for grass measuring slurry height in tanks. You know, the weather stations will do the rainfall, the wind speed, and the temperature of the soil. And we'd be looking big into grass growing and grass measuring, and the nutrient management plans as well, because all that is going to be very important. Grass is going to be a very valuable thing, yes, but as the lads say there, I believe we can grow an enormous amount of it here, and any excess could be used to balance the feedstocks in the anaerobic digester. Yes. The sensors, as I say, some of them go on the milk tanks, they go on the slurry, some of them go on the meal bins, where it'll send you an information that your meal bin is nearly empty. The weather one, to myself, is the most important, because you have a local weather station in your pocket. And look, that'll tell you when, you know, the soil temperature is right to spread the fertilizer, and would help us with making decisions to spread slurry and that as well. It's a big long peninsula. What happens on one end, you could get merciful rainfall, and on the other end, it could be a different day completely. You might move on again for me, please. That's the Plutus, yes, and it's supported by the Dingle 2030, and you have Kerry Agri again are supporting, and Teagasc and the IFA, and all the data goes back to NetFasa. They're based in Dingle as well, where they collaborate all the data and they move it on to the national bodies, and that's great information for all the farming community. You might move on again for me, please. Again, yes, to do with the data management and the sensors. And yes, you might move on again for me, please. The weather station, yes, and the soil data, and the pasture base, yes, very important to grass. So we'll be incorporating grass measuring into that as well. And great information coming back to the farmers, and great information coming back to Teagasc, and great information coming back nationally to the whole area. You might move on. There's one more, I believe. And again, please. Another project through the Creative Climate Action is happening here. It's the Creative Arts Project, and where we've heard an artist will be coming onto the peninsula to work with 10 or 15 farmers to look into, you know, climate action and what could be done. And I believe the lady will be with us for the most of a year, and we'll be working closely with her. But if I go back to the dairy SCC, there's great appetite out there, but we do need the right incentives. We do need support. We need support from the Department of Ag. We need, you know, as I say, some of our land might be poor that can't be used for growing grass, and you know, we've been told in the past not to fertilize too close to water courses, and so all this is losing land. In my own view, but look, if we can put PV panels on it and you know, use as much as we can and send it back to the grid, there has to be, you know, it's our emissions gain, to me, would be, you know, as important as any financial gain, because we've been singled out here, the farmers, and especially the dairy farmers, and you know, we've been accused of causing all these emissions, and there is so much we could give back. We can give back to the grid in electricity, and we can give back in biodiversity ways as well. So thank you for your time. And I must acknowledge all the great work by the Dingle Hub and all their support on all these initiatives. Without having a centre like the Dingle Hub, you know, it would be impossible for the group of farmers to try and get anything going. They've been absolutely brilliant. Thanks.
Dinny Galvin, overlooking Dingle Bay, thank you very much for your presentation. Very comprehensive overview there of what's going on Dinny's farm. He's a sheep farmer and he's milking 50 cows as well. So Dinny, the best of luck to you and thank you very much for joining us today. So we're going to move on now with our next panel of 4, and beginning with Tadhg Buckley of the Irish Farmers Association. From a farming background, Tadhg is currently Director of Policy and Chief Economist with the IFA, and he was formerly Head of Agriculture with AIB Bank. We're also joined by Ray Langton of SEAI Ireland. Ray is the SEAI Programme Manager responsible for the support scheme for renewable heat. We're also joined by Gillian Mahon of the Climate Change Advisory Council. Gillian was appointed to the Climate Change Advisory Council in 2021 and is a specialist in the area of management with experience in the public and areas of finance as well. Bill Cashman of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. Bill is the Chief Inspector of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, with responsibility for the provision of scientific advice for agriculture and the government. You're all very welcome along. Thank you for being patient. Tadhg, if I can go to you first, I'm interested to know what sort of interaction is the Irish Farmers Association having with the government at, I suppose, looking to the future, and how you can collaborate and what sort of incentives are going to be there for farmers? Because incentive is a word that's used quite a lot, and Dinny used it there as well.
Thanks, Damien. So I suppose, yeah, as you say, I think we got some very interesting presentations today, and it gave a very good outline of I suppose, both the challenges and opportunities that we face. And I suppose from an agricultural perspective and from a farmer's perspective, what we have been trying to do, I suppose, is trying to look at the whole challenge that's there and see what can we do in terms of both looking at, first of all, the emission side of it, understanding it and understanding the challenge that we face there. But in side by side with that, what opportunities farmers have to play a positive role as well in terms of the climate challenge we face and the emissions challenge we face. And I suppose, in fairness, this is what today's event is doing and helping to highlight. So the work we've been doing, I suppose, first of all, has been on the climate plan in terms of the emission side of it, to make sure that the targets that we get from an agricultural perspective are realistic and are achievable. And I think, in fairness, where we've got to so far, I think agriculture has got a very, very challenging target, but I think that we can potentially get there in terms of a roadmap to 2030. But I suppose side by side with that, it's about what farmers can have huge opportunities from the energy perspective, from the renewable energy perspective, to actually generate both energy and both an income as well, and help in terms of mitigating emissions. And the role, I suppose, we've worked on with that side of it has been, how can we help our farmers grasp those opportunities? And that there's a combination of that. We have been working from our member services perspective in terms of looking at pilot projects from the solar side of it, but also we've been working in terms of engaging with the Department of Agriculture, but also with the other departments as well, particularly on the microgeneration support scheme, making submission to that and trying to ensure that what comes in terms of that policy is user friendly to farmers. And I think Pat alluded to that earlier in his earlier presentation, that the policy that we badly need that policy to the new a more fit for purpose microgeneration policy. At the moment, Ireland generates only 2.6% of our total energy is from renewable energy, from microgeneration renewable energy, versus an EU average of 12%. So we're 23rd out of 27 on that side of it. So we have a long ways. We're down near the bottom of the pecking order from a European perspective in how we've been performing year to date so far. But I suppose that does outline the opportunities that are there. And one of the reasons that we are struggling to do it is because the policies that have been there at the moment really focus on big energy. So they focus on big solar, big wind. And we haven't given communities and farmers the opportunity to generate, or the policies to help them participate from a renewable energy perspective. And that's what we need to really grasp now in the short term.
And Tig, we do remember that a lot of farmers, they had a disaster in growing biofuel in the past, maybe up to 20 years ago. Is it a case of once bitten, twice shy? Is there a bit of scepticism among farmers about dipping their toe in the renewables waters again?
I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the last I suppose that period. I think it was covered very well in an earlier presentation. What we needed to, what it proves is that if you're going to take an initiative, you need the downstream plan as well, and you need appropriate policy around it, and that's where that fell down particularly. Now, I think there is an appetite there amongst farmers to engage again. One of the things relating to anaerobic digestion is that if you are growing a feedstuff or to feed into it, if that is grass, well then you have a certain fallback position. Whereas if you're in Mycanthus or willow, well then your alternatives are fairly small. So I think that if we can build confidence with farmers and show them that there's a plan a whole ways across the value chain here for them to participate, I think we could do it. But I wouldn't say one thing, all right, on that, Damien. We've got to be careful not to overpromise. Okay. I mean, we certainly have significant opportunities, but there are significant challenges there as well. I think it's going to be a mix of energy sources then that are going to work. It's not going to be just one type, and they will have their opportunities, but we got to be realistic too. When we talk about, for instance, anaerobic digesters, I think they have a great role to play. But we've also got to balance that with what we are capable of generating nationally to feed those digesters. Yeah. So it's about being realistic with farmers, putting a plan in place, and I think it's about possibly not over-promising what it can do either.
Yeah, okay. Gillian Mahan, you're very welcome along. I'm really interested to get the Climate Change Advisory Council perspective on this, of the role of bioenergy into the future and of farmers. What say you in that regard?
Good afternoon, Damien, and good afternoon to everyone. I suppose I would preface my remarks, Damien, by saying that my expertise isn't in the agricultural sector or in science. So I've been appointed to the Climate Action Advisory Council on the basis of having expertise and experience working both in the private sector financing area and more laterally in the National Treasury through both ISIF and the SBCI, who are both put in to obviously invest in the country at different points of the value chain. So I suppose from the overall presentations we've seen, I think there is absolutely a requirement that the renewable energy sector can be deployed within the agricultural sector. It'll bring about the innovation that's required, but also, I suppose, to the points that have been made by other panelists, both in this panel, but also in the previous recognition of the previous statements that were made, there is a requirement that there is a systemic approach to it, so that we don't just try to deliver based on an individual piece, that we need to think about all the actors that are aligned. And I suppose from the Climate Action Advisory Council perspective, we do see the merit in a holistic approach and recognising that needs to be delivered as part of a general solution to the climate action.
And with your commercial experience, Gillian, I'm just wondering, how should we approach, I suppose, the financing of the infrastructures that will be required?
Well, I suppose that there's two ways, there's more than two ways, but there's a general move afoot to recognising the value of sustainable finance, and that will be the direction of travel for those who can supply finance. So I think that there's a recognition that from the use of both public finances and private finances, that will be where solutions will lie. The dependence on just government financing will not be sustainable. One, the size of the amount and the ambition that we have put forward in the country in terms of what we're going to deliver, public financing just won't be able to deliver it. That's the reality of the situation. It will require that private investment aligns with it. And therefore, there has to be a joined up thinking approach across the sectors. So not just with, with the grant system, but looking at how we would bring support in from EU funding, looking at examples of what's been deployed in other countries and in investment platforms, etc., that can be actually bring all the stakeholders and engage them in terms of bringing finance to support the great innovation we're seeing across the industry and everything that's heard today.
And Ray Langton, the support scheme for renewable heat, it's an example, I suppose, of a specific policy intervention. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thanks very much, Damien, and thanks to all the listeners. It was great to hear so much strategic input here this morning, and people talking about the interventions and so on that are required and the supports. But the support scheme for renewable heat is one that is actually in place now. And it's available. It's open to applicants right now as we speak, and it focuses on heat. So it is a support scheme for renewable heat. It's open to commercial, industrial, agricultural, public sector, basically all non-domestic and non-ETS. So not sites that are in the emission trading scheme, but everybody else in between. So basically, all the community that we've talked about here this afternoon. And it's focused on replacing fossil fuels with renewable heat. Uniquely in agriculture, it has the extra benefits right across the supply chain, in terms of supplying fuel and all the way from forestry to actual use of the final fuel. And the support scheme for renewable heat offers two distinct types of support. Either a grant upfront for heat pumps, or uniquely, and this is a new type of support from SEAI, a tariff that pays out over 15 years and basically pays a monetary amount for the eligible heat for biomass or biogas heating systems. So the heat that is used for as I say, for eligible purposes, it is submitted on a metered basis every quarter for 15 years, and basically there's a check in the post in that regard. And heat, as so many speakers spoke about here already, a huge part, 40% plus of agricultural energy is going into heat. So the first thing that basically anyone who is using fossil fuel should do is have a look at the terms and conditions in relation to this scheme. It's all on our website, but it does offer this unique opportunity to decarbonize and at the same time save money. The next thing I would say to people is look at the renewable alternatives, because the different types of heat systems obviously have different applications. So would a heat pump work for you? Would biomass work for you? Would biogas be better? What's the system unique to your system? And just understand how SSRH could work for you. Just to give an example.
Sorry, Ray. No, just on that, I'm wondering if we're talking specifically about agriculture. When you stand back and you look at the agricultural landscape and the round in this country, how well suited, are Irish farmers? And of course, they vary in size and they vary in enterprise. Sure. But in general, when you look at the land use around the country, how I suppose do you see them adapting to the renewable heat scheme?
Yeah, and I think it's a very good question, Damien. It really depends on the type of enterprise that you have. We have a lot of applicants from poultry, from pigs, from horticulture, and other related industries, baking and so on, the brewing, all that type of thing. Anyone that's using heat, basically. And just to give a sense of scale, Damien, so we're talking about the heat that's used in the operation itself. And all these operations vary in size, but if you have a poultry unit, say, just to use rounded figures, perhaps producing 1 million birds per year. So that's a substantial, but typical poultry unit with 4 or 5 poultry sheds. They would enjoy a tariff payment from the support scheme from renewable heat of 35 to 40,000 euros per year. And our average across poultry is about 25,000 euros per year. So it's a substantial financial benefit at the same time as completely decarbonising the heat use on that site. So depending, to answer your question, Damien, where can it apply? Really, it applies mostly where people are using substantial amounts of heat: poultry, pigs, mushrooms, horticulture, that type of area.
Right. And just before I move on to Bill, are those grants, are they given per farmer or per site?
Per site and per use. So if there is if somebody has multi-sites that they could hypothetically have multi-applications. So it's for the individual use, the individual farm, the individual. It's for the individual point of heat use.
Yeah, okay. Bill Caslin, I'm just wondering your role, the government's role, if we can call it that, in working with farmers in scaling up renewable energy production in this country. Where are we at in all of that? And do we need an awful lot more joined up thinking? Because it's multi-departmental, I would have thought.
Yeah, certainly, Damien, and thanks for the invite to talk to you today. But I suppose I'm just thinking of, look at what are the value adds that I can bring today. And the most important one is to really identify the commitment to the whole issue of renewables by the Department of Agriculture. And it's very much on the policy radar. For me, when I look at the climate issues, I try and describe it as our objectives are to reduce emissions. And that's bringing efficiencies, reducing dependence on chemical fertilizer, etc. To remove emissions, that's your management of land, forestry, etc., and also a contribution to energy. And that's twofold. That's either energy within the farm use itself or to overall the contribution to the national grid. Now, it shouldn't be underestimated. There's a significant contribution already through, for example, biomass, particularly from afforestation, and that's the equivalent of 1 megaton equivalent CO2, which is very, very significant, effectively using biomass from forestry waste, etc., towards heat production in the main. The key drivers for me are a couple of fold. We have a regulatory expectation in terms of climate commitments that have been made, but there's also what we're hearing very much from industry is an expectation from the consumer of reducing the footprint. So certainly we would have industry who have made representations around the whole energy efficiency. So dairy processing, by way of example, which are significant users of fossil fuels and looking at ambitious ways of how to replace them. So there's a couple of key policy drivers for me in terms of that. I think just on the round, I know there's a lot of people talking the opportunities, but you talk about joined up thinking. I don't have the energy responsibility that Department of Environment have in terms of energy policy. We look at it from an agricultural point of view. But importantly, the economics must stack up. So when you look at whether it's solar, whether I look at anaerobic digestion, etc., the opportunities are there. We very much endorse it, but it must be financially viable for a consumer and also for the producer in terms of production of feedstocks. So I've seen many proposals at times, let's say, where the suggested cost of grass, for example, or silage going into those is just not realistic, I think, in terms of the producer of that in the first instance. Yeah. Similarly, very ambitious plans where the state would take up the slack in between it, and my eyes watered when I looked at the level of subvention that some people felt was necessary to get it off the ground. So it just has to be a bit of balance into it, and you're certainly right about joined up, but it is on the policy agenda very much. Yeah. We do see an important future in it, but it must be economically viable for everybody on the chain.
Well, just on that, and I'm interested in your reservations, particularly in relation to anaerobic digestion, considering that north of the border it's quite popular. But there is Project Clover, where a number of dairy co-ops have come together with a plan for anaerobic digestion. And it's not just a case of an idea. The clock is ticking for a lot of their customers in terms of them meeting carbon zero emission targets, or else the business goes elsewhere. That's what consumers are saying. So in relation to anaerobic digestion and a project like that, you may not want to comment on a specific project, but in terms of the necessity for it, because consumers are demanding that we are more environmentally friendly in the way we produce our food, that must come into play here.
Absolutely. No, it does. I suppose we enable and we regulate industry as a department, so in terms of that enabling piece, it is very critical that the sustainability footprint of Irish food continues to improve. We have a very strong reputation in that, but the innovation and development is absolutely critical, and that's what was articulated. People talked about the policy. Well, the two policy drivers for me are Food Vision, which came out recently, which really, I suppose, put the importance of sustainability front and centre of Irish agriculture, and also the Climate Action Plan of 2021, which really has set out the framework for ambition overall. So they are critical, but I think just it depends on listeners in terms of where they're coming from, but there has to be just an economically viable, sustainable, longer term. Government can, as I describe it, grease the wheel, but can't necessarily run it. So if you want to look by way of example at things going wrong, just look at the north of the border in terms of cash for ash, when the balance wasn't particularly right. So from our perspective, we're seeing a lot more well thought through, very informed, well-considered proposals that coming together now in terms of potential for AD. I see a really significant value for agriculture for a couple of reasons. One is, it provides that opportunity for heat. Wind power will always beat on electricity, but not on heat, on transport of biomethane, as I think Barry mentioned. The uses of manures, etc., as part of that, and even as a diversification opportunity for farmers in terms of provision of feedstock. It has to be taken seriously in that context.
Okay, Tadhg, back to you. I mean, the IFA constantly complain that their members are not making enough money. That's your role, of course. It's been going on for years and years. There are obviously great opportunities here facing you directly. But when you have Bill there on the call, what do you say to him are the demands or the needs of your members to be able to, as he said, diversify?
Well, I suppose in fairness, I think what Bill has just said there, I don't think there's anything I would disagree with, really. I think in fairness, the key policy part of this is the microgeneration support scheme, which is with the Department of Energy, Climate Change and Communications. I mean, and so there's a few things here that and again, I think someone said earlier about the joined up thinking, which is completely is so important. So what we have here is we have there's a few things happening at the same time. We have the requirement to reduce emissions. We have the across all sectors. So we have agriculture who has its own job to reduce emissions itself, but also there is an opportunity within agriculture to help and benefit other sectors, be it the energy sector, to mitigate emissions as well. But it can only do that if it's economically viable. Now, it will need those sorts of energy investments will need state support. I mean, I think everybody knows that. And that's one part, but there's also the other part is about it being enabling in terms of the policy around planning, around the capacity to sell energy back into the grid, which in fairness has been discussed earlier as well. So they're the key things that need to happen. It's not that we have to give farmers the opportunity to be able to participate in these. And we've got to understand as well, and I think one thing that sometimes gets lost in the debate, your typical farm in Ireland has a very low energy usage on farm. On average, a farm in Ireland uses nearly half what an average European farm uses in energy. So when we talk about, the heat demands, it's only a handful of farms that relative to the 120,000 farms we have that use them. And in those farms, there's real opportunities to displace energy usage on farm with renewable sources. But for the vast bulk of farmers, it will be putting in renewable energy that helps them displace the energy they're using to a large extent, but also they have to be able to have the opportunity to sell it back because they're going to have excess.
Yeah.
Now, the second thing is that we have a situation, as you said, Damien, where farmers, particularly in our dry stock sectors, have a very low income. They're a lot of them are classed as vulnerable economically. So there is an opportunity. They will grasp opportunities where they can diversify, but they'll only do it if they know that if it's a safe bet.
Yeah.
And that because again, it's and the other thing we've got to remember is that there's an awful lot of our land that can't grow anything other than grass. I think Dinny Galvin covered that earlier very well. So we've an awful lot of our land that we can't put it into crops. Grass is the only thing that can grow on it. So it's what can those farmers? But a lot of these can look at solar, other things like that as well. So what opportunities can we offer those farmers that are realistic and they don't have to put themselves in potential financial vulnerability to participate in those schemes?
Okay, and Gillian, just on that, you hear there Teagasc concerns about the financial vulnerability of a lot of farmers in this country, mainly those that are involved in dry stock farming who are part-time and are not making much money from the land. In terms of risk assessment and a carrot and stick approach to how we obviously encourage society to become more energy efficient and invest in renewables and solar energy and so on and so forth, how do you go about the breakdown in terms of financing projects? Because we obviously all need some money in the first place before we can get grants, but where's the balance there in terms of public and private funding of this?
That's a challenging question. Thanks, Damien. I suppose maybe if I just could come back to a couple of points that were made earlier, because they feed into this for me. I suppose to Bill's point about everything being economically viable, and I completely agree. And I think from the council's perspective, there is the expectation that it would be the case, and that the private sector would ultimately be part of the solution. I suppose there's the other piece, though, from the climate change position is that we don't leave people behind. So therefore, it is about the transition and justice around the transition and basically climate justice, and for those who are maybe less able to cope with the changes that are being required of us and are being required of this sector particularly as well. So to those points, I suppose. Because the climate action doesn't generally talk about policy, but it would talk to how it might be implemented. I will talk probably in my own capacity of my experience of financing from both a public and private perspective. And I think to a point, it has to be recognised that for initial change, grant is nearly essential for certain industries. Where there is a market failure, where there's lack of appetite by the private sector to take up the slack in something unproven or something that doesn't look viable in the beginning. I think to the policy piece from Bill's perspective, those initial steps are always there. I think there are questions when you start to look at trying to throw large money at untried, untested innovations. That is a difficulty. I think what we've seen in a lot of the examples here, and to Dinny Galvin's presentation, the vast array of things that can be brought to be inclusive for community as well as to the producer themselves, is that you will need an alignment of a blended finance perspective. So it will be the need for the initial grant piece, but it will also need private investment, and private investment will need to be incentivized to bring it along. So schemes like we've seen for other initiatives where there is risk sharing involved with either using public funds or using European funds or structures like that will all be part of the package. There'll be need for private and public collaborations in terms of the bigger projects. But we are trying to bring everyone with us. So from the smaller farmers' perspective, it will require grants to make the initial changes and the transition. But thereafter, there should be a look to a more I suppose, viable and economic position for everybody as we go forward.
And Ray, just coming back to you, have you seen a shift, I suppose, in public attitude towards renewable energy and schemes such as the support scheme for renewable heat as a result of course, all the publicity that we're hearing about in all of the news and all of the science with regards to climate change? Are you seeing a shift in public attitude, or is it still a little bit of a hard sell from your perspective?
No, there's a definite shift, Damien. There's a growing interest and demand. You can see it, as you said yourself, all the time in the press and on the news, and that's great. The one thing I'd say, which fits very much with what the previous speakers were saying there, is it's really important that people don't jump to stage 3. You follow the journey that Barry outlined and actually that Dinny showed. Regardless of whether you're looking internally at your own energy or into a market, that really understand your energy consumption and really or understand your market if you're looking outside your own boundaries, and then drive efficiency or economics as Bill referred to, because there's no point in chasing something that fundamentally doesn't stack up. And then move to your choice of the renewable. Sometimes you do find people want to move to, as I say, to step 3 of a choice of renewable without really understanding the market or understand their own energy use. So a huge amount of interest in it. But sometimes it's good to look at it from first principles and really, as I say, understand that market. I would just say that there's a couple of basic tools that SEI can offer in that regard. There's an energy academy which is free to join up to, and there's a module on energy and agriculture that can be very helpful just on the basics, either for yourself or for staff if you have staff or family that are involved in it, just to understand and to help you go on the kind of journey that Dinny talked about earlier. And there's also an SEI voucher of €2,000 for an energy audit. So, if somebody wants in a small or medium agriculture business to just start thinking about what that journey might be, it's there for the taking.
All right, Ray, we're going a little bit over time. Just one final question then maybe to Bill Callanan. For the farmers that are looking in here that are facing, so many demands on them over the next few years in terms of reducing emissions, Bill, are they achievable when you look at all of the various strategies that are out there?
Just before I answer that, though, I just talked to that issue of grants because I wanted to confirm with Ray there the value of there was a collaboration between ourselves and SEAI and that energy academy so that farmers would understand their own energy use. Because irrespective of selling to the grid, etc., displacing the cost of energy intake into the farm beats all else. So there's grant aid under TAMS, there's grant aid under the likes of the horticulture aid scheme for both improved efficiency. So whether it's that variable speed drive pump or LED lighting, all of that, there is grant aid available, and it's important to recognise that. At a higher level in terms of AD, the policy there is clear. We've set out an ambition nationally of 1.6 terawatt hours of AD by 2030. So it is important. So we have to work on how do we achieve that sustainably. In terms of what you're talking about, I speak to, I think what Pat Smyth said earlier, I'm around quite a while too, and the one thing I've always learned in agriculture is the capacity to improve, to change, to take on. If you look at even CAP, you had McSherry reform, Fischler reform. Things have evolved, and farmers will evolve with it. And they've always, as Dinny, I suppose, exampled earlier, are very enthusiastic of saying, look at what is our pathway to contributing. It's going to be a challenge. I can't say otherwise, but I do think we have the capacity here. Once there's clear actions that can be communicated to farmers and they understand them. That's the critical thing to me. They understand them, whether it's a combination then of ourselves, like the sign in terms of policy direction, developing Teagasc advice and guidance, putting it out there through the signpost farms, etc. They're all critical components to the pathway into the future. We're committed to doing that, collectively, and that's my final comment. All right, okay, we're going to leave it there. Bill Callanan, thank you very much indeed from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. My thanks indeed to Gillian Mahan, to Tyg Buckley and to Ray Langton as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for your insights, and
let's hope that the audience at home and all of you that have been watching us have learned something over the last 2 hours or so that we have been here. We've had some really wonderful presentations and some expert advice in the whole area of renewables and on-farm renewables and how they can help meet the climate challenge, which of course faces us all. And we do know the role that landowners and farmers in this country will play. It'll be very pivotal in the next 5 to 10 years, right up until 2030. Well, I'm going to leave you now here from the Shelbourne Hall at the RDS, and I'm going to hand back now to finish this afternoon's proceedings back to Barry Caslin. But for myself, Damien O'Reilly and all the team here, thank you very much and have a great weekend. And Barry, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Damien. Thanks very much, everyone. I won't hold you long. I just think that today that we've heard that there's many factors at present that has influenced on us to consider renewable energy options. And with such uncertainties there in world affairs, we need to improve our energy security by reducing our dependence on imported fossil fuels. I think on a wider scale, we need to tackle climate change by reducing the level of greenhouse gas emissions in the Earth's atmosphere. And at independent farm level, an investment in renewable energy, it can both reduce the high costs of energy inputs, and it can also provide an additional source of income for the business. And we've seen that in so many other European countries where a diversified farm producing renewable energy can improve the income stream of that farm and that holding. It also will give a green image to our production, which is of increasing importance in the marketplace. And I think we're going to see our dairy co-ops looking to our farms, saying 90% of the emissions are coming from the farms, and there will be an onus on the co-ops maybe to work with farmers to get emissions reduced. And one area that could be worked on is on the renewable energy side of things there. I think in farming that energy costs only represent a very small percentage of the turnover, but reducing them can directly increase the profits and the competitiveness of the farm. I think continued research and development is going to be very essential here to the future success of agriculture and forestry. I think in contributing to the growth of renewable energy. And it's equally important that the rollout of the findings of that research through knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer and technology transfer, that it's delivered efficiently to the agricultural sector. So reducing energy use makes perfect sense. It saves money, it enhances the corporate reputation, and it keeps everyone in the fight against climate change. I think looking ahead, Teagasc are very keen to ensure that the agricultural community are represented in the renewable energy area, and we're working with all our stakeholder base to take their views as policy evolves in this area. I'm a big believer that as farmers should try to attend off-farm talks and presentations just like this wherever possible. And to me, the answer to diversifying while at the same time helping to fight climate change is staring everyone in the face. It is renewable energy. And I think the inconvenient truth is that many of us already know that. Farmers are said to be pivotal in the transition to renewable energy. And I think that the avoidance of a repeat of this energy crisis that we're in at the moment, where we see explosive soaring gas prices, by using the land owned by farmers to host renewables and switching to renewable fuels and electrified vehicles and considering options such as growing bioenergy crops, these are all things that we need to be considering. We heard about the microgeneration scheme today. We've been waiting for this quite some time. It was well discussed, and this will hopefully be followed by a scheme for larger electrical projects, because the microgeneration scheme only goes up to 50 kilowatts, so smaller type projects, rooftop, solar, etc. So hopefully we will see something happening for larger projects above 50 kilowatts and maybe up to 500 kilowatts, maybe up to 1 megawatt. This will be a very welcome step towards the renewable energy transition to get those larger projects going. The SSRH, or the support scheme for renewable heat, which Ray spoke about today, that's going to offer opportunities to the pig, the poultry, the horticultural units to produce renewable heat from biomass. And that scheme is open today. And the RES scheme, or the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, that's going to provide an opportunity to farmers to host or lease their land on a long-term basis for energy projects around solar and wind. I think the problem the farmers have is not a lack of potential renewable options, as nearly every farm could be suitable for wind, solar, even hydroelectric in some situations. The problem is some of the hurdles that we have to face, things like grid capacity, the connection, planning, the rigorous planning process that we have here. And the first obstacle, and probably the most tricky one to overcome, will be how we upgrade the grid capacity and the connection process. So we have the innovators and the technology to put the infrastructure in place, but most crucially, we have the elements. Here in Ireland, we have the ability to be virtually energy self-sufficient or renewable energy self-sufficient and greatly reduce our fossil fuel usage. We heard today from Dinny Galvin, a great talk from Dinny, as he always gives, that many farmers have already seen some of the benefits of investing in renewables on their farms to help reduce their own energy consumption costs. I think these investments are tiny compared with the potential revenues on offer to the farming industry through large-scale commercial green energy projects. I also want to draw your attention to a large event planned for Gertrude College in July of next year. It's called Energy and Agriculture, which Damien has been host of for many years. And it's going to take place next year on the 19th and 20th of July. It's going to outline opportunities for farmers to update on current policy, provide guidance on ways to optimize existing systems. And we are going to incorporate rural businesses into that as well. So that's why it'll be a 2-day event. The farmers who are buying electricity from the grid, they have the land or maybe the rooftop available. They can look at solar panels where the payback periods may be in the region of maybe 6 to 8 years, maybe better if they consider accelerated capital allowances, which are available to write off that tax in a much quicker period of time. The wind turbines may be still a good option if you can get the planning permission. Heat pumps, they offer an opportunity to replace gas consumption. There's a plan there for 600,000 heat pumps by 2030. So I think we will see them in a lot of our houses replacing kerosene in the future as well. Batteries are slowly becoming more affordable, and hydrogen is something we didn't talk about today, but I think that's something that's going to become more affordable in the future as well. Just finally, I just want to say I believe that we're on the cusp of some massive changes in the way that we produce and use energy in our daily lives. We're going to have to find renewable energy from somewhere soon, and agriculture is going to have a massive role to play in this transition. I finally just want to thank all the speakers, Ty Buckley, David Stiles, Pat Smyth, Ray Langton, Bill Callanan, Dinny Galvin, Gillian Mahan, Maurice, Deesy, David Hagen, and special thanks there to our MC, Damien O'Reilly. I also want to give a very special word of thanks to Professor Cathal, the chair of the RDS Agricultural Committee, and Dr. Geoghegan for organising today, and also to Paul Farrelly from the RDS in pulling things together today as well. So finally, I want to wish you a great weekend, and despite all the COVID negativity, I suppose at this stage, I want to wish you a wonderful Christmas as well. Take care and goodbye.